Good morning, my friends. Welcome to our New Testament challenge. Today, I will be sharing with you some words from the fourth chapter of the Gospel of Mark. Yesterday, we talked about some of the stories, how there's always seems to be a little edge to them in Mark, that his are not comforting stories, but really challenging stories. They make you think. And really, the whole chapter, the whole fourth chapter of Mark, we began to hear how he would tell parables, stories with a moral, stories that pointed somewhere else. Um, you know, there's a underlying meaning there, and sometimes the disciples would come and says, "Why are you always speaking in parables?" He says, "Well, to you have been given the secrets of the kingdom of God, but for the outside, everything comes in parables." Um, certain parables, people will look and they'll say, obviously, this is what he means because they have that relationship with God. They can see this. But for those who do not have that relationship, the parable makes no sense. And so you can talk about it, hear it, but when you know the person, the author, then go back to that image, when you know the author, the power of the parable underneath becomes more clear. And so he's telling these stories both to the believers and to new folks and folks who are maybe piqued in their curiosity about this. And then they're also good for us today because as we hear them and as we dive into them, we begin to know more and more about God through his use of these parables. And so the first one he talks about is the parable of the sower. And he tells the story. The disciples come to him and ask him, okay, what does this mean? And then he explains it to him. So this is probably one of the few times when he really goes in depth and said, so parable of a sower. He goes and he sows seed, and he said some of it, fell on the path. The birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky ground where it didn't have much soil, and it sprang up quickly because there wasn't a depth of soil. But then the sun fell on it, and it scorched, and it had no root. Other seeds landed in good soil, but there were thorns. And so as it grew, the thorns choked it out. And then there were some that fell completely in good soil, and it grew. And he said sometimes yielding 30, 60, and 100-fold. And he said, I love this, let anyone with ears listen. Now, this parable really kind of explains how the rest of his parables, how people look at the rest of his parables. And they say, okay, what does this mean? He says, okay, the sower is God, and the seed is the good news. All right, so think about this, church. Think about this, folks. The seed is the good news, and you can plant the seed, but really depending on the soil. And we have, in a sense, I was about to say no control over the soil. The soil being the person, but we can help prepare the soil. But ultimately, yeah, it is what's in the soil and where they are at the time. So there will be some. We preach the gospel, it'll bounce off. It's that seed on the hard path. People, birds will come and take it away. There were some people who hear the gospel and are not moved at all. Kind of reminds me of the story of the raising of Lazarus. Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead, and you would think everybody, upon seeing this dead man walking out of his tomb, would automatically believe. But there were some who did not believe, and their only focus was to go and tell on him. So some seed falls on hard paths. Some people hear it, but it doesn't make anything. Some people respond enthusiastically. I think of, we were at one church and we would have annual revivals. And there was always this one gentleman who would come down to the altar at every annual revival. He would come and rededicate. And so, by the time the next year come, he needed to rededicate it again. And so the soil wasn't very deep. And so they would come and they would respond with emotion oftentimes, and get so excited, but then the next day they go back to the regular life and they don't have anything else to sustain them. And the worries and cares of the world, the hot sun would come out and their faith would wither because they had nothing to sustain them. And then there are some who would receive the gospel, and they would, they truly meant to have that gospel. They loved it. They understood it. They wanted to have that relationship with God. But then the worries and cares of the world kind of came up and just choked it out. They allowed the thorns to grow and to kind of choke them out. And maybe they missed. They didn't. They weren't in a community of faith. Maybe they didn't get to go to worship. They didn't sustain it. They didn't water it. They didn't pull the weeds. In other words, things just kind of grew up around them, and their faith just kind of got choked out. And then ultimately, there are those who receive the gospel, and it grows, and their faith grows. And we see how one person's faith can affect other people. And so oftentimes you will see one family member come to faith, and then another family member, and they'll bring other people in, and you can see just the impact of their lives by doing that. So I love this parable. It really is a wonderful illustration of how the gospel is received in the world, and it hasn't changed. I mean, there are still people who are hard path and people who are good soil, and everywhere in between. He talks about the lamp under a bushel. He says, you don't hide a lamp under the bushel. You let it shine. You don't hide your faith. You let it shine. You do the things of God. Don't be ashamed of being a follower of Christ. Some people, I've seen a T-shirt recently says, if you think Christianity is boring, you're not doing it right. And some people do, so if you are truly responding to the call of God in your life, then it will be exciting. It'll be nerve-wracking. It'll be just the unknown. It'll be something that will change your life. Do not hide your lamp, your light, under a bushel. He talks about the parable of the growing seed. He said, the kingdom of God is if someone would scatter seed on the ground, would sleep and rise, and the seed would sprout and go, but he doesn't know how. And so this is the image we have of the farmer, and we hear other places where we are called to plant seeds. And then there are times when we harvest. But God is the one that grows the seeds. God is the one that grows the faith. We do what we can. We prepare as best we can. We preach, we teach, we sing, we love, we do all this other stuff. But it's God is the one that changes people from the inside. It is God the one that builds that relationship. And we just got to recognize that fact, that there are some things that are outside of our control, but they are in the control of God. The parable of the mustard seed. You ever seen mustard seeds? They're teeny-tiny. And he says, all you need is we just need a little bit of faith. He said a mustard seed is the smallest of seeds, but when it grows, it becomes a great big bush. So that the birds of the air can make nest in it. And then he continues to talk about, the parables again. And then at the end of the day, I love this again, at the end of the day, he gets out and he said, let's go on across to the other side. And so they leave the crowd behind. They get in the boat, and other boats were there. And this great storm comes up, and the winds are blowing, and the waves are rising up. And Jesus goes down and goes to sleep. Jesus takes naps. And they said, teacher, and they come to him and said, don't you care that we're perishing? And he's like, if you ever want to know if Jesus got exasperated, right here. He says, peace. He turns, and you can almost, see this. You ever really tired and someone comes and wakes you up and you just, there's no subtlety here. You can almost hear him. He's asleep, and someone, Peter, wake up, and he just turns and says, "Peace, be still," and the waves and the wind stop, and you can almost see him, you know, why are you afraid? Have you still known the faith? And he turns over and goes back to sleep. I love that part. And they were filled with great awe, and they said, "Who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him?" So even here, even after they've been with him for a while, he still does things that just blow their minds. And God can still do that for us today. Hope this helps, my friends. Take care, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.